the Rochford Files. Today will be a solo show. I thought about trying to get a guest at the last second, but I ultimately decided that I think this is a topic that I can do on my own. So let me try to spread the word out that it's live real quick. Pretty much what this show's going to come down to today is tearing down the myth of the lesser evil. I felt like a lot of the discourse this weekend on the left really had to do with the whole lesser evil thing, and I at least hope that I saw a small amount of people who ultimately did decide to vote for Joe Biden in the past election come around to the whole myth of the lesser of two evils. So we got a big show ahead, giving a couple moments for people to get in the chat. Okay, I think we're ready to go in. So I'm going to start here since this happened over the course of the show on Friday while I was on with my guest Jesse Gines. Yeah, so on Friday we had Andre Domise and Marianne Williamson on Twitter having a debate on this Israel and Palestine issue. So I honestly wish I would have pulled up more snapshots on this because Marianne Williamson deleted quite a few of the tweets where she was justifying her both siding of the Israel and Palestine issue. But since she did that, I think Andre Domise, he is one of the best voices on this issue right now, especially when you consider that he's not directly connected to on the ground reporting. So let's go through this thread from Friday where he sums up the whole issue. Getting sick and tired of this, so I'm just going to say this. Marianne belongs to a class and generation of Jewish people whose entire identity has been constructed around a terra nullius fable of Israel that never existed. Challenging that means challenging their whole identity. She'll never budge from this position, not because she's afraid of being wrong in public or just a stubborn person, because if she admits the truth, easily accessible in history text happening in the news before her eyes, she also has to admit believing her believing lies her whole life. No different than Fox News watching relatives who buy into Trump politics and Q conspiracies. They have to keep believing the lie because the gap between reality and their worldview is so wide, they would be psychologically untethered if they accepted the truth before their faces. It's not specific to Jewish people either. Having grown up in the Baptist church, I've never been in a single evangelical church community that didn't teach the founding of Israel as a gift by the civilized world to a wandering people, custodians of the Messianic mind. Point being, the version of Zionism that created and maintains the state of Israel isn't a simple wish for an ancestral homeland, but an ethnocentric and colonist ideology maintained by the world's most powerful states, granting an imperial foothold in a resource-rich region. That's not an easy reality for people to reconcile, so instead they close their eyes to the bombings, the police brutality, the massacres, the lynchings, and pogroms, and call it an even Steven both siding are suffering set of unfortunate circumstances to soothe their conscience. So yeah, sucks that Marianne Williamson was likable to a lot of people and had some plain spoken views on race, class, history that you don't see from the average groom for success politician. But the truth is, she's a committed Zionist, and mean tweets won't change that. She's not going to be fixed or changed. I've had too many conversations and lost too many friendships with people just like this to expect any other outcome. That's our political and media class in a nutshell. Committed to a lie because the truth is terrible to comprehend. I think that was well said. It's unfortunate that there's moments where Marianne Williamson has some of the better takes on the issue and being on the right side with the left, but then there's moments like Israel and Palestine where she both sides it. And even though the left is the smallest group, uh, both siding, this is still a bit of a problem, even though it's clear that Palestine is the oppressed people, and I and it the majority of the left understands that you have to support the oppressed people in this situation. In spite of all the counter propaganda being done by Israel trying to say that they're just defending themselves. But to shift back to Marianne Williamson, this also brought me to another bad take of hers that over the past few months. And this one had to do with Joe Biden. She justified her vote of Joe Biden by voting out the fascist Donald Trump. But I think this recent moment is showing that it's not true. So I'm scrolling down this search here because it's going to show a few instances of her justifying her Joe Biden vote by uh, portraying him as not fascist. And I'm going to get into Joe Biden shortly. So it's proving that he's fascist just like Trump. And in certain ways, there's moments where his fascism is worse. And it's not any less plainly spoken than Trump either. So for those viewing on the stream right now, you're seeing a bunch of people replying, challenging her view of Joe Biden not being the fascist. And that tweet right there, even though she didn't say the words, we know it was implied that she said Joe Biden was not the fascist. And this one back in February, because I wanted the fascists out of the White House and I would do it again. And we're going to see where that originally, what elicited that type of response. But especially this past weekend, past week and a half in general, that's been evidence that to go against that argument that certain progressives would have that Joe Biden technically isn't fascist. Well, Donald Trump definitely is. So I felt this was important to highlight because of the big discourse of the weekend of lesser of two evils. So this is what prompted the response. And she's also been too generous to Joe Biden at times during the rare moments where he has spoken in speeches. She has really, for some reason, applauded those speeches, and that just didn't make sense to me because he really, all he really did in what, the 2 or 3 speeches since Biden has been president is just give us a lot of platitudes. He's lied about continuing to fight for the $15 minimum wage, for example. He's lied. So that's pretty much what his speeches have boiled down to, where liberals have eaten up to the platitudes like no other. I'm going to shift over to this video back in 1986 of Joe Biden. So I'm going to play this real quick, then take you over to the week, what he's done over the weekend. So you see here, this is just another numerous examples of Jim Crow Joe not being the same Joe Biden that he was 20, 30, 40, nearly 50 years ago. This guy has not changed for the better, but the mainstream machine convinced a shit ton of people that he was the guy who would save the people from Donald Trump while going on a while equating the one guy in the campaign who had the best chance to be a stronger contrast to Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, although now it's even more obvious that Bernie Sanders, he was the compromise. He wasn't as strong of a contrast as I thought, supporting him in two campaigns with the way he's capitulated to the establishment both times. That's really shown that to be true in my eyes, and why you have to challenge his stances more in the Joe Biden administration. But to shift back over to also what else Biden has done to not prove, he was supposed to fix the border and make it a more humane system. That's what he told us in the campaign, right? No, he's being deporter in chief 2.0. And it's not just brown people. He's deporting people at a much higher rate than the guy he was vice president under in Barack Obama. He's deported Haitians at a record rate. So this immigration issue is not just brown, it's also affecting black people as well. But I'm about to go over to what he did over the weekend and break down this discussion that he had with the Israel Prime Minister. So, in a tweet from the White House, today the president spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, reaffirmed his strong support for Israel's right to defend itself against rocket attacks from Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza, and condemned those indiscriminate attacks against Israel. Going down to this tweet, as you see, he's getting rightfully ratioed for his support of Israel. I'm going to get into this a bit more, but I'm going to be right back, so just give me a minute. All right, I'm back to go into this because all the Biden administration statements, they've been supportive of Israel. They're painting this as Israel is the one being impressed. But that just isn't true when you look at the numbers of the Palestinian people who are getting killed and injured. And it's a and we see all the attack videos that get posted online. It just makes it even more clear that the Palestinians are the ones who need the help right now and need someone to step in and tell Israel to stop. Oh, that honestly brings me back to one more tweet about Marianne Williamson, who had said that Biden should intervene with Israel. So give me a moment to get that tweet up on the screen. So in the midst of her both siding this issue, when we saw the Biden statement on Israel and Palestine, she decided to respond by saying that part. So yes, sometimes this things can get a bit slow with all the tabs I got up on the screen for the show. Especially in my 3-screen setup that I've got here. All right, I'm just gonna skip bringing that tweet up. The point is, do you really want Joe Biden to intervene for Israel when all that you know is that it's going to be done negatively and it would not help the Palestinians whatsoever? No. Which brings me to what just happened earlier this morning. Here's an article from the Washington Post. I can't remove that advertisement off the screen, so it's going to make it a bit hard to read if you're watching on stream. The Biden administration has approved the sale of $735 million in precision-guided weapons to Israel, raising red flags for some House Democrats who are part of shifting debate over the U.S. government support for the Israel government Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Congress was officially notified of the proposed sale on May 5th. 3 people on the Capitol Hill familiar with the notification told my colleague Karun Demiryan and me. This was a week before Hamas, the terrorism-designed organization that controls the Gaza Strip, began intense rocket attacks against Israel that have reportedly killed 10 Israelis. The rockets have been answered with the ongoing Israeli airstrikes that have left nearly 200 Palestinians dead and sparked worldwide calls for diplomatic action. This crisis is the worst since a 2014 Hamas-Israel war that lasted nearly 2 months. While calling for an immediate ceasefire, the administration has said that Israel has the right to defend itself against Hamas, a position the majority of Congress has previously supported. But a new generation of House Democrats more open to questioning Washington's support of Netanyahu's is raising some concerns. Some lawmakers want to know more about the new proposed sale, its timing, and suggesting it be used as leverage. In the past week, the Israeli military strikes have killed many civilians and destroyed the building that housed the Associated Press, an American company reporting on the facts in Gaza. A Democratic lawmaker on the House Foreign Affairs Committee told us, allowing this proposed sale of smart bombs to go through without putting pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire will only enable further carnage. The administration is required to inform Congress of such sales, although official notification generally only comes after Congress has informally agreed. Once the formal notification is made, lawmakers have 15 days to object with a non-binding resolution of disapproval. The bulk of the proposed sale of Joint Direct Attack Munitions, or JDAMs, kits that transform so-called dome bombs into precision-guided missiles. Israel, which has purchased substantial quantities of JDAMs in the past, has said the Gaza airstrikes are precision guided to avoid hitting citizens, but charged that Hamas uses civilians in the heavily populated enclave as human shields. President Donald Trump vetoed 3 resolutions passed by Congress in 2019 to stop arms sales benefiting Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates after the House and Senate voted to block the arms deal worth more than $8 billion. A spokesperson for the House Foreign Affairs Committee confirmed that Congress was notified on May 5th of the commercial deal in which Boeing will provide the weapons to Israel. But some foreign affairs lawmakers were caught off guard over the weekend when they first learned of the sale, according to a source with knowledge of the private conversations. "We're lucky to catch this weapon sale," a Democratic aide who works on the committee told Power Up. "There's zero transparency on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and sensitive deals are regularly approved without scrutiny." That aide added of the committee, chaired by Representative Gregory W. Meeks of New York. "There's truth to the notion that there's major shifts in the party about how we rubber stamp Israel with writ large, a Democratic Senate aide told Power Up. The aide added it's unlikely the debate over the sale will ultimately result in a resolution of disapproval from Congress. So I think that sums up the main point of the article well. My question to you is this really the person in Joe Biden that you want to intervene? Everything in that article has just indicated that he would only intervene in a negative way. So don't tell me that the pro Israel oligarchy are the people who can help provide a proper solution to Palestinians, because they simply won't. Also, in the Jen Psaki's White House presser, it just indicated that the Biden administration just won't do that. They're trying to pretend that they're neutral, but their actions are really proving that they're just going to do the opposite. Well, it is a small positive that you've got a few House members that are speaking up in favor of Palestine. Truth is, a lot of them aren't following through with that action when it comes to voting. I could go into that a bit more, but I needed to show you another tweet in relation to that. So I'm bringing up a couple of tweets from Ben Norton of the Gray Zone. One of the best sources you could go to for coverage on Israel and Palestine, him, Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate. I haven't mentioned them yet, but they're also another top source for this issue because they're going to tell you honest facts of what's going on. Now, on to the tweet. While the Israeli apartheid regime is massacring Palestinian civilians trapped in the Gaza prison camp, Joe Biden just signed a deal to give it $735 million more in weapons to slaughter children. This is the change that Biden promised. When he said America was back, it was a threat. Reminder that it was under Obama in 2016 that the U.S. agreed to give Israeli apartheid regime $38 billion in unconditional military aid over 10 years. That's $10.4 million of U.S. military aid per day, every single day for a decade. Now Biden is signing even more arms deals. So is this the status quo that you want? Because this is what a lot of people got propagandized into having to choose in order to defeat Donald Trump back in November. remember enough and trying to get people to have the cognitive dissonance to forget that a lot of this stuff happened with under that same administration that Joe Biden was vice president under with Barack Obama. You have to remember that Obama increased the drone strikes compared to the amount that previous President George W. Bush had. So, this is the America that we know. It doesn't matter which party is in power because, in all likelihood, even the more progressive Democrats aren't going to challenge this system. That's the military industrial complex for you right there. And it's a big part of why these are the conditions you see right now along the Gaza Strip. It's because the United States government is complicit in their support of it. About to put up another video on the screen. I don't have much sports crossover to bring to this show today. And there will be some episodes of the Rochford Files that may not even have a single instance of sports crossover. But that's one of the things I want to do on the show because most people in this left media space aren't doing that. And this video comes from over the weekend, and Kyrie Irving in a post-game press conference. Fortunately, I don't think that video is gonna play in its entirety, but there's not a lot of athletes, even in the NBA, who are speaking out about this issue over Israel and Palestine. And I wanted to give Kyrie Irving credit here because for as many moments as he goes against the conventional statements that he goes against the grain, he goes to the beat of his own music, and I think he takes a lot of unfair criticism when he takes some unconventional stances just in when it's about his profession being in the NBA. In this instance, he is right to speak out in this opportunity he has in a post-game press conference, telling reporters that he wasn't really interested in talking about the game and wanting to make sure to shine light on what's going on with Israel and Palestine. But let's not forget, this isn't the only instance of human rights being violated. You're also seeing it in Colombia. And also, it's not the only place where the United States is actively supporting the oppression of other human rights. They're constantly trying to take over countries like Venezuela, Bolivia. They're trying to prevent those countries from having socialism in place and helping install right wing authoritarians to what their idea of liberation is. I also wanted to point out with Kyrie Irving, he's not in the liberal group speak that you typically have from the majority of professional athletes. He's proven this over the course of his career that he doesn't fall in that group. He passed up on being in the NBA bubble to try to advance the black liberation from the outside during the midst of all the Black Lives Matter protests that were going on all over the country. Although, when the strike happened, the Nets would have likely been gone from the bubble if he had decided to try to play. But I think he may have been a valuable voice in trying to challenge the whole ending the strike. Because the way I see it is, I think you needed at least a star player to challenge someone like LeBron James or Chris Paul, who were ready to accept the concessions provided by former President Obama, who tried to step in and stop the NBA strike by just trying to get a lot of arenas to be polling locations, which is the point I'm trying to make. It smaller and not significant as you would think. And that's one point I often try to make against the pro-voting liberals. So yeah, anytime that you got the voting suppression that a lot of these southern states are trying to push through, you have these liberals who are always, they're just about making sure you have the access to vote. And for me, I just don't want to settle on that. I'm not about, hey, you've got access to vote for the corporate blue team guy. No, I want more. I always talk beyond that level. So that's one of the things that kind of irks me in a way about liberals. They haven't evolved beyond the mindset of just giving people a chance to vote Democrat is good enough. The reality is, it really isn't. And there were quite a few elections across the country where you have these quote unquote centrist Democrats, like your Jamie Harrison, Amy McGrath, and they got beat pretty decidedly in their elections. All those really, the only purpose those served, it was a grift to the Democratic Party, raise more money. Since when you look at the reality of the two-party system, what happens in a deep red or deep blue district, it just means that it just gives both parties a great opportunity to fund themselves with the typical losing candidates that run in those safe districts they have no chance of winning. But I've got one more thing to go in on Israel before we shift to other ways that this lesser of two evils thing is a myth. Earlier this morning, Israel, they posted this tweet. Rocket emojis. Rocket emojis. More rocket emojis. Some more rocket emojis. Fifth tweet, sixth tweet, seventh tweet, eighth tweet, ninth tweet, 10th tweet, 11th tweet, 12th tweet. And then the 13th and 14th tweet finally gets to their propagandist point. Just to give you all some perspective here, these are the total amount of rockets shot at Israeli citizens. Each one of these rockets is meant to kill Israel under attack. Make no mistake, every rocket has an address. What would you do if that address was yours? And once again, that goes to another example of Israel propaganda that makes themselves look like the oppressed while trying to paint the Palestinians and Hamas as the real offenders here. Then I wanted to get this image up here. Sorry that this is slow to load on the HAPS platform. This is one of the downsides of broadcasting through HAPS, even though their biggest positive is the amount of platforms I could stream the show on for free. But let's break down this image. We've got this from 2008 to 2020. 2008, 3,202 Palestinian injuries and deaths. Just 853 Israeli. That number gets worse in 2009, 7,460, while only 123 Israeli. 2010, 1659 to 185. 2011, 2260 to 136. 2012, 4936 to 578. 2013, 4031 to 157. And now we start to get huger numbers because 2014 was one of the big years of the Israel-Palestine attack. 19,860 Palestinians, only 2,796 Israelis. 2015, 14,813 to 339. 2016, 3,572 to 222. 2017, 8,526 Palestinians to only 174 Israelis. Then the most violent year against Palestinians was 2018, with 31,558 combined deaths and injuries to only 130. Then 2019, 15,628 to only 133. Then last year, 2,781 to only 61. So when you look at this image here, for each year of the Palestinian, you can pretty much see the black indicating the deaths. Most years it's easy to see. There's a few years where it's really tiny, but that just doesn't take away from the point of this violence being one-sided. And it's against the Palestinians. Then when you look at the Israeli side, look how hard it is to see the black. I'd probably have to zoom this screen to like 400, 500x to even see if there's any indications of Israeli deaths. That right there is the evidence of that goes extremely against the one-sided, the both sidesing that you're seeing a lot. Conservatives, when they're not, a lot of them aren't afraid to come out with statements of being pro-Israel. But you've got a lot of liberals who are really open about being both sidesing. And what's hypocritical about this is a lot of these liberals were claiming to be for Black lives. A lot of them, they've got Black Lives Matter in their Twitter display name or their bio. Then they've been capitulating to Joe Biden. They've been talking about how he is such a much better president than the previous Donald Trump. Then they've been defending Israel's right to defend itself in a clear one-sided attack right now, while at the same time condemning the Palestinians who do decide to take action and defend themselves from the Israelis. But don't forget, these same liberals over the summer, they were condemning the looting and rioting that were going on in states across the country during the George Floyd protest, not realizing that 97% of protests were peaceful. Then even less of those 3% are actually done by the people in favor of Black Lives Matter. You had a lot of outside agitators, or it was other white supremacists or police that were trying to incite people into doing things that were counterproductive to the movement. And then you saw mainstream media shift its focus a lot to look at these instances of buildings burning and stuff being stolen, while completely ignoring all the instances of police brutality. And when you have the prism of social media to help you continue to see that, you would see that the violence, just like the Israel and Palestine, was mostly one-sided, with police against the people. And it's connected because a lot of the Israel Defense Force gets trained in the same way that the U.S. police officers get trained. Before we close on the Israel-Palestine issue, I wanted to read an article from one of the best journalists we've got on the left, and that's Chris Hedges. It's from Friday, but I think it's still very important to share. Israel's big lie: this isn't self-defense, it's a war crime, aided and abetted by the United States. Oh, it's from Saturday, but either way, Nearly all the words and phrases used by the Democrats, Republicans, and the talking heads on the media to describe the unrest inside Israel and the heaviest Israel assault against the Palestinians since the 2014 attacks on Gaza, which lasted 51 days, killed more than 2,200 Palestinians, including 551 children, are a lie. Israel, by employing its military machine against an occupied population that does not have mechanized units, an air force, army, navy, missiles, heavy artillery, and command and control, not to mention U.S. commitment to provide a $38 billion defense aid package for Israel over the next decade, is not exercising the right to defend itself. It is carrying out mass murder. It is a war crime. Israel has made clear it is ready to destroy and kill wantonly now as it was in 2014. Israel Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who was the chief of staff during the murderous assault on Gaza in 2014, has vowed that if Hamas does not stop the violence, the strike of 2021 will be harder and painful than that of 2014. The current attacks have already targeted several residential high-rises, including buildings that house more than a dozen local and international press agencies, government buildings, roads, public facilities, agricultural lands, 2 schools, and a mosque. I spent 7 years in the Middle East as a correspondent, 4 of them as the New York Times Middle East bureau chief. I am an Arabic speaker. I lived for weeks at a time in Gaza, the world's largest open-air prison. More than 2 million Palestinians exist on the edge of starvation, struggle to find clean water, and endure constant Israeli terror. I have been in Gaza when it was poured with Israeli artillery and airstrikes. I have watched mothers and daughters wailing in grief, cradling bloodied bodies of their sons and daughters. I know the crimes of the occupation, the food shortages caused by the Israeli blockade, the stifling overcrowding, the contaminated water, the lack of health services, the near constant electrical outages due to the Israeli targeting of the power plants, the crippling poverty, the endemic unemployment, the fear and despair. I have witnessed the carnage. I have also listened from Gaza to the lies emanating from Jerusalem and Washington. Israel's indiscriminate use of modern industrial weapons to kill thousands of innocent, wound thousands more, and make tens of thousands of families homeless. It is not a war, it is state-sponsored terror. And while I oppose indiscriminate firing of rockets by Palestinians into Israel, as I oppose suicide bombings, seeing them as war crimes, I am acutely aware of a huge disparity between industrial violence carried out by Israel against innocent Palestinians and the minimum acts of violence capable of being waged by groups such as Hamas. The false equivalency between Israel and Palestinian violence was echoed during the war I covered in Bosnia. Those of us in the besieged city of Sarajevo were pounded daily with the hundreds of daily shells and rockets from the surrounding Serbs. We were targeted by sniper fire. The city suffered a few dozen dead and wounded each day. The government forces inside the city fired back with light mortars and small arms fire. Supporters of the Serbs seized on any casualties caused by the Bosnian government forces to play the same dirty game, although well over 90% of the killings in Bosnia were the fault of the Serbs, as is also true regarding Israel. Second, and perhaps most important parallel, is that the Serbs, like the Israelis, were the principal violators of international law. Israel is in breach of more than 30 UN Security Council resolutions. It is in breach of Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Convention that defines collective punishment of a civilian population as a war crime. It is in violation of Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention for settling over 500,000 Jewish Israelis on occupied Palestinian land for the ethnic cleansing of at least 750,000 Palestinians when the Israeli state was founded, and another 300,000 after Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank were occupied following the 1967 war. Its annexation of East Jerusalem and the Syrian Golan Heights violates international law, as it does its building of a security barrier in the West Bank that annexes Palestinian land into Israel. It is in violation of UN General Assembly Resolution 194, which states Palestinian refugees wishing to return to their homes and live in peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practical date. This is the truth. Any other starting point for the discussion of what is taking place between Israel and Palestinians is a lie. Israel's once vibrant peace movement and political left, which condemned and protested against the Israeli occupation when I lived in Jerusalem, is moribund. The right-wing Netanyahu government, despite its rhetoric against fighting terrorism, has built an alliance with the representative regime in Saudi Arabia, which also views Iran as an enemy. Saudi Arabia, a country that produced 15 of the 19 hijackers in the September 11th attacks, is reputed to be the most prolific sponsor of international Islamic terrorism, allegedly supporting Salafist jihadism. The basis of Al-Qaeda, the groups such as Afghanistan Taliban, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and the Al-Nusra Front. Saudi Arabia and Israel worked closely together to back the 2013 military coup in Egypt, led by General Abdul Fattah al-Sisi. Sisi overthrew a democracy-elected government. He has imprisoned tens of thousands of government critics, including journalists and human rights defenders, on politically motivated charges. The Sisi regime collaborates with Israel by keeping its common border with Gaza closed to Palestinians, trapping them in on the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated places on earth. Israel's cynicism and hypocrisy, especially when it wraps itself in the mantle of protecting democracy and fighting terrorism, is of epic proportions. Those who are not in Israel are not Jewish in Israel are either second-class citizens or live under brutal military occupation. Israel is not and never has been the exclusive homeland of the Jewish people. From the 7th century until 1948, when Jewish colonial settlers used violence, ethnic cleansing to create the state of Israel. Palestine was overwhelmingly Muslim. It never was empty land. The Jews in Palestine were traditionally a tiny majority. The United States is not an honest broker for peace, but has funded and enabled and defended Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. Israel is not defending the rule of law. Israel is not a democracy. It is an apartheid state. And that's the article from the award-winning journalist Chris Hedges, one of the best voices for issues like this. And another person on the left who is really right on all the right issues. And I thought this article did a great job of providing some historical context to people who didn't quite have it yet. So I appreciate this, what this article done here. But it also illustrates the main points that supporters of Israel is Palestinian human rights have been making for a while. Is this is one-sided violence, and the world's top offenders of human rights, they've got solidarity with each other. The United States, we have this false belief of being free. And I think there's a group of people who know we aren't really free. But then we've got a lot of people on the right who think we are free, but truth is we don't realize that we really are. I'd also like to shout out a couple other, have to shout out Katie Halper's coverage as well of what's going on in Israel and Palestine. She's had some very good guests on this issue, and I haven't mentioned her yet as someone that you should go to for more coverage here. But now I'm going to shift back to more issues that affect us here in the United States. And this just came down from the Supreme Court earlier this morning. Supreme Court to weigh rollback of abortion rights. So Supreme Court agreed Monday to a showdown over abortion in a case that could dramatically alter nearly 50 years of rulings on abortion rights, with 3 justices appointed by Donald Trump, part of a 6-3 conservative majority. The court is taking on a case of whether states can ban abortions before a fetus can survive outside the womb. The dispute is not a direct challenge to a woman's constitutional right to abortion. The court first announced in a 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, reaffirmed 19 years later. But in considering weakening protections for women who seek pre-viability abortions, the justices could remove some of the underpinnings of a woman's rights to choose and lay the groundwork for even more restrictions on abortions, including state bans on abortion once a fetal heartbeat is detected as early as 6 weeks. The case from Mississippi probably be argued in the fall, with a decision likely in the spring of 2022 during the campaign for congressional midterm elections. It involves a state law that would prohibit abortions after the 15th week of pregnancy. The state's ban had been blocked by lower courts as inconsistent with the Supreme Court precedent that protects a woman's right to obtain an abortion before the fetus can survive outside her womb. States may regulate procedures prior to viability, so as long as they do not impose an undue burden on the women's right, but may not ban abortions. More than 90% of abortions take place in the first 13 weeks of a woman's pregnancy, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So, the reason why it was important to cover this is because you're going to see the liberal reaction of their response will be attacking people for not voting the right way. And this is takes me back to one of my points I like to make about liberals whose response to every issue is vote, 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 vote. The problem, they've got the voting on a pedestal that's too high. And why this ties into the whole lesser evil thing is a lot of people voted for Joe Biden because of the Supreme Court. And the issue with that is there's a lot of people on the left like myself who didn't believe that Joe Biden would, if he had the opportunity to appoint someone, we didn't think he would appoint someone liberal to balance out the court. The reason why I didn't buy the Supreme Court argument is because I felt like Joe Biden would still appoint conservatives to the Supreme Court. Because at the end of the day, Joe Biden is only a Democrat in name only. We don't talk. This doesn't get talk enough outside of left discourse. But you see the MAGA Republicans complain all the time whenever, well, the old establishment Republican does not fall in line with the MAGA agenda. We saw how upset they were at people like John McCain when he was the tipping vote early on in the Trump administration to prevent the rollback of the Affordable Care Act. And this is going to take me into the big point of what I had. Then you had Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg pass just a few weeks before the election. Then liberals used that as another moment to force their voting mindset when we're seeing right now how much electoralism has failed us. And even though I'm in Colorado, one of the easiest states to vote because we got full mail-in voting. You can It's easy to just fill out a ballot at home. We've got the highest participation in the country, but I'm not going to sit here and try to tell people to that they must continue to improve things by voting because this is not a level playing field here. You've got people that have to wait several hours to vote in line, make a long ass drive. So I cannot go the privileged voter route when I understand that. A lot of people can't do that. I can make a case for why you should still try to make your dissent count against this oligarchy, but I can't force people into voting in these current conditions that have been presented by the left. And we've got a lot of work to do to build power outside of the party. So for those people who can vote, we will still need that help. But we also must understand some people just don't have the conditions that make voting easy for them, while understanding that we probably have an easier path to getting more done by direct action from the outside. And this finally brings me to the discourse that I think it boiled down to over the weekend on the whole lesser evil argument. So I'm about to pull a tweet up that went slightly viral. There we go. Dear YT leftists, if people of color tell you and agree that Trump was the lesser evil, you should probably listen. I don't think it's wrong. And let's go through some of the responses real quick. Then I'll tear these apart. Here's Vaush, a self-claimed socialist who is really a liberal, and he's not a good person for this moment, and he's counterproductive to the left's goals. Also, he's a toxic person, but why are tankies always the most shameless weaponizers of liberal identity politics? You might as well be K-hot. Then another common argument is, I take this means you voted for Trump. Then you've got some false equivalency of the explanation of saying that if Trump was the lesser evil, that automatically meant that you had to support him. I'm going to show a NPR poll real quick before I close out with trying to tear apart this whole lesser of two evils argument. So thanks to Nick, Socialist MMA, for making me aware of this article. Where views on race and police stand a year after George Floyd's murder. Where white and black Americans have very different views on race in America and have a very different experience when it comes to dealing with discrimination and trusting police. About 3/4 of Americans agree with the guilty verdict for Officer Derek Chauvin, though half of Republicans and Trump supporters think it was wrong or aren't sure. So let's go down to the race and trust in police part. Just 30% of American adults said they have often or sometimes personally experienced discrimination or been treated unfairly because of their race or ethnicity. But that is very different along racial and ethnic lines. Only 15% of white people said they have experienced discrimination or treated unfairly based on their race, while 61% of black Americans and 39% of Latino people said they have. So here's the graph right here. Then the next point, Republicans at 91% were far more likely than Democrats, 62%, to say they at least have a fair amount of confidence in police officers in their communities to gain the trust of local residents. That bipartisan trust doesn't extend to Black Americans. Just 46% of Black adults express at least a fair amount of confidence that local police can gain trust. Then the graph shows just as many Latino people as white people answered 77% for that. Next, 61% of Black Americans said they think local police treat people of color more harshly than white people. Just a quarter of white respondents agree. Latino people were split. Overall, 32% of adults said they thought people of color were treated more harshly than white people. But that is up 7 points since 2015, the last time this question was asked. There have been numerous high-profile cases of police violence involving black people and multiple demonstrations bringing light to this issue. Predictably, there was a huge divide on the question of who someone voted for, as almost 6 in 10 Biden supporters said people of color are treated more harshly, while 8 in 10 Trump supporters said they're treated the same. People have had more confidence in the police to keep them safe and protect them from violent crime. About 3/4 of respondents, including a strong majority of Black Americans, said so. It was notable, however, Black Americans and younger Americans were the least are likely to agree with that. Two-thirds of respondents said they believe current policies regarding police use of force need reform. However, there is a sharp divide around party lines. 92% of Democrats, 66% of independents agree with reform, but only 33% of Republicans. Then more polling, almost 9 in 10 respondents said they are comfortable about talking about race with friends and family. Only 2/3 said they actually have talks at least sometimes. White people were far less likely to say they had such discussions with black people, but there was a big educational divide among white people, as white people with college degrees were more likely than those without degrees. Small town and evangelical white people were far less likely as well. There was also a wide generational gap. Those in the greatest generation, 74 or older, were far less likely. Hopeful about race relations. So a slim majority of Americans said they approve of how Biden is handling race relations, including half of independents and 85% of Democrats, just 14% of Republicans. As this polling proves, there's still a bit of a wide gap here. So I thought that was relevant to share because even though polling does have some margin of error based on the sample of people you choose, there is the whole, and now it's time to tear down this whole two evils. But the main point of that article was 3/4 of white people really believe that the police treats black people the same as white people. Come on. There is a reason why I think as much progress as we've had on the defund the police movement, this poll shows that there's still a lot of people that are propagandized against the idea of trying to make a greater transformation. They're being convinced that you still have to give them more money in order to improve them. And I'm saying that it's like giving that kid his full privileges to play video games all the time when they're doing poorly in school, and that's the same situation you see with the police. They're not being punished correct. They're not being punished right. Then you've got Democrats and Republicans, but definitely Democrats are more open about giving them more money. Although, and that's why they're still being propagandized. And it's why so many of these white liberals are telling on themselves each moment of the Biden administration. They're okay with being pro-Israel. They endorse the idea of increasing police funding. By the way, those are both issues that go hand in hand. They're out here telling you that he's either a much better president than Donald Trump. They're constantly saying how they're going to brunch. And these are the same people who try to tell you that they're an anti-racist ally. But the truth is, they're the white liberal that and the moderate that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King warned you about. And don't get me wrong, it's not just the white people who are solidly liberals. There's a lot of there's white people who label themselves as progressives, but they fit the same type of person who is also the false ally as well. And it takes me to the point where if you're still rationalizing Joe Biden as a lesser evil, this is an extremely unproductive argument that you're taking on your part. It's only been nearly 4 months of the Biden administration. He hasn't done anything to improve healthcare. He abandoned the public option towards the end of his campaign. Compare that to Donald Trump. While he had always talked about, at least during his campaign in 2016, as the fake populist, he had talked about an actual approval of the healthcare system. I'm not saying personally, I never bought into that lie, but the point is that small rhetoric outflanked Hillary Clinton. And in this, even though he went hard into the cultural war against Joe Biden, and that failed just enough, I doubt that with a slight majority in the Senate, I think you still got the same status quo healthcare. Then you're going into the border, as I mentioned earlier. Joe Biden is deporting people at a higher rate than both Barack Obama and Donald Trump. And it's sickening how much those cages are being packed at a worse level than the peak of the outrage that many of these Democrats in Congress had when they came down to visit, the emotional crocodile tears they had. But now it's fine now that Joe Biden's in charge. As I said before, this issue of the border, the inhumanity here, it doesn't just affect brown lives. It's also an attack on the black refugees and immigrants, especially the Haitians. Then we break down the imperialism. Donald Trump lied on both campaigns on ending the wars, while Joe Biden, he's never pretended to be the one to end the wars. And I know that recently he's verbally said that he would commit to removing the troops from Afghanistan. And we had some progressives who were ready to give him too much credit here. Truth is, he's just getting ready to privatize the troops over there. But from a imperialistic standpoint, there is no lesser evil. Your vote for a Democrat may make you feel slightly better, but the fact is that Palestinians don't feel the difference between the Democratic administration, Venezuelans, Colombians, and several other countries in Latin America do not feel the difference of your so-called lesser of two evil vote for the Democratic candidate. Then we also go into another failure of the Biden administration, and that's how they fail to fight for the $15 minimum wage. And how at his State of the Union, he says he still supports it. They refuse to override the Senate parliamentarian. He and Vice President Kamala Harris would not get the rest of their Democratic dissenters to fall in line in a situation where they could have passed it with a simple majority. So if nothing's going to change at the federal level from a minimum wage, we know Donald Trump also wouldn't have done anything to change the minimum wage as well. Let me preface that. He may have committed to that $11 or $12 minimum wage. And what's weird about that, even though it doesn't meet the floor, it's still possible with the pressure from another stimulus package. They may have done an $11 or $12 increase. Well, and that's sad, even though it still doesn't meet our floor of 15, and how we have to start to ask for 25 in order to move the Overton window over. Just like if you want a properly defunded police, you're going to have to start to demand the police to be abolished. But then once again, that's another thing in the breakdown where there still was a window of possibility for Donald Trump to increase the minimum wage. And what I'm certain of right now is it's just not going to happen under a Biden administration. So the point I'm making is there's so many issues where the lesser of two evil just doesn't exist. And even from a domestic standpoint, really the only thing that the Biden administration, there's some small executive orders that are slightly better than what Trump would have done in his second term. And I'll concede another one and say that Donald Trump probably doesn't add that child care to another package. So you voted the lesser of two evils just for crumbs. That's it. And this past week and a half should be a big eye opener for the progressives who felt like they had to capitulate into voting for Joe Biden. This isn't an attack on those who voted Biden, but were realistic about what that vote meant. No, this is to the people who fell into the idea of we can push Biden left, or Biden can become the next FDR. And the only type of FDR that Joe Biden is, the side of the FDR that he is becoming is not the populist side. It's the racist one. And that's what you're seeing right now. It's only we're only a third of a year into the Biden administration. And it's important that by the time that the next election rolls around, that we don't let people forget about what Joe Biden has done in the humanity that he supports. He supports the ethnic genocide of Palestine. He doesn't support a humane system of immigration. And he's still complicit with separating families at the border. He's now packed the cages more than Donald Trump did, as we've seen in photos a few weeks ago, while we are still in the height of the coronavirus pandemic. This still isn't over yet, and we're not getting people vaccinated at the rates to get herd immunity. And that brings me to the last point of how the Biden administration doesn't stand out from the Trump administration, and that's the COVID-19 response. We've seen after Biden has taken office that he and other Democrats in elected positions across the country, they've adapted the right-wing talking points about the coronavirus. It didn't take long into the takeover to push to get children back into school, while they've applauded their vaccination rate. But don't forget, Donald Trump quietly is pushing for people to get vaccinations as well. And he was probably going to push the vaccination at a similar rate, even though it's unpopular rhetoric among his MAGA base. Then Republicans have been the ones trying to push people to go back to work. And just this past week, when you see retailers and fast food struggle to get people back to work, guess what Joe Biden said? He says you must accept work or lose your unemployment benefits. So don't forget that. Both these guys are pro-corporations. The only difference here is Joe Biden's the rainbow corporatist with the empty symbolic gestures. So this is why, if you're still trying to defend the Joe Biden being the lesser evil, it's just an extremely unproductive argument. And it makes very good sense why Joe Biden is a greater evil for the left. Because he has placated the left flank of the Democratic Party. He's got the progressives falling in line. AOC has said he has exceeded expectations. Pramila Jayapal has given him his administration an A. Ilhan Omar has said she is happy. She feels like she is being heard, and the point is, the argument of Joe Biden being a greater evil is valid because there just isn't much separation between the two. So there you have it for today's solo stream of the Rochford Files. But let me get the Patreon on screen real quick before we go. So patreon.com/the Rochford Files. As you can see, my 3 levels of support, $2, $5, and $10 a month. Benefits are in the works. I'd like to get a supporter base in place. I'm still waiting for my first Patreons. And I would like to give a shout out to this is the highest viewership I had during a live stream so far. I've seen 19 viewers. So I appreciate that and hope to get some more growth in that regard. Also, go to the YouTube channel, the Rochford Files on YouTube. I have started to clip a couple things for I have a couple clips up from Friday's episode, and I will probably clip out this end part right here. Once again on Wednesday, I'm not sure if I'll have a stream. I hope that the second Pfizer shot does not affect me enough to ruin that. But I will be working on getting a couple of the smaller leftist YouTuber channels like me on as at least one of my guests this week. So thanks to y'all who watched the Rochford Files on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook Live. And if I don't see you on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, it will definitely happen on Friday. So have a good couple days.